a human warship arrived, and the galaxy's nightmare began. Sci-fi. The 12,000 ships arrived without a warning signal. They came in dark, no transponder ping, no approach broadcast, no hail to Earth's orbital authority. One moment the outer sensor ring showed clear sky. The next, the displays in the monitoring center at Addis showed a wall of returns so dense the system flagged them as sensor malfunction and called for a technician. The technician arrived, looked at the screen, and sat down very slowly without saying anything. The Chiron hegemony had sent 12,000 ships to tell humanity something simple: that it was over. High Provost Valerius arrived at the leading edge of the formation in the command chair of the Ascendant Creed, a vessel so large its shadow fell across two of Earth's weather satellites simultaneously. He did not stand for the address. He tapped the arm of the chair with the hard tips of his fan digits, a slow metallic rhythm he kept without noticing, and watched the feed from his forward lens as the blue-white marble of Earth filled the display. It was, he thought, a modest planet. He had seen larger ones burn. "Open a channel," he said. The channel opened. Valerius looked at the lens and let 3 full seconds of silence pass before he spoke, a Chiron technique for establishing dominance, the pause that said, "You will wait as long as I require." "People of Earth, I am High Provost Valerius of the Chiron hegemony. 18,000 years ago, my civilization began a project. We call it total integration. 412 species now live inside that project, connected, optimized, made capable of things your biology cannot yet imagine. Today, you become 413. He paused again, and when he spoke next his tone dropped by half a register, the way a man's voice drops when he is explaining something to a child. "Your research post at Epsilon 9 has already been absorbed. The 41 researchers stationed there are unharmed and will be processed according to our intake protocols. This is not a war. Wars are fought between parties of comparable standing. Consider this a demonstration of your place." He closed the channel himself. He did not wait for a response. On the surface, in a room 11 floors below a granite ridge in the Himalayas, Director Elena Vance heard the broadcast on a standard-issue audio relay, the same relay the rest of the world heard it on, and she did not move for a long moment. She was holding a paper cup of black tea that had gone cold. She set it down on the edge of the planning table. She did not set it down hard. She set it down the way you set something down when you are thinking about something else entirely. 41 researchers. She knew all their names. She had read their personnel files twice, once when they were assigned, and once the week before, when the sensor arrays first picked up the Chiron approach signature. She had hoped she was wrong about what was coming. She had not truly believed she was wrong. She pulled a chair out, sat in it, and looked at the far wall where a physical map of the Epsilon 9 station was pinned. Paper. Printed on actual paper, at her order, 18 months ago, when she had begun to understand that some things needed to exist in forms that certain systems could not reach. "Start the clock," she said. The technician at the secondary console, a young man named Faris who had been with the program for 6 months, looked up at her. He had never heard those words in that order before, not in any briefing, not in any protocol document. He did not ask what she meant. He looked at her face and decided he did not need to. He started the clock. The readout on the secondary panel showed a single line: glass ledger, synchronization sequence active. Then he minimized it, because Director Vance had told him, on his first day, that you never leave something on a screen that you do not want the wrong person to see. Stay close. What comes next is the part they don't put in the history files. 3 weeks after the blockade began, the Chiron had established what Valerius called a civilization audit, a systematic cataloging of Earth's technological base. He had assigned a junior logistics officer to oversee it, not a senior commander, not even a mid-tier analyst, a logistics officer, because the job of cataloging a primitive world's resources was fundamentally an administrative task, and Valerius had more pressing work. The audit reports came back in batches. Reading one on a slow afternoon, Valerius found a line that made him pause. Human communication infrastructure relies in part on packet transfer protocols not derived from standard galactic architecture. He read it twice. He flagged it for technical review, which he did not follow up on, because the next line clarified that the protocols were inefficient by Chiron standards, and the flag was almost certainly not worth his time. He was right that the flag was not worth his time. He was wrong about why. The audit teams moved through Earth's orbital infrastructure with the brisk efficiency of people who had done this 412 times before. They catalogued, they rated, they assigned integration tier numbers to every system they touched, a current practice so old it had its own sacred vocabulary, the language of total integration, which held that any civilization could be measured by the depth of its connectivity. Earth scored a 12 out of a possible 300. Valerius reviewed the rating in his daily summary and said nothing because there was nothing to say. A 12 was not a civilization in any meaningful sense. A 12 was a starting point. He had absorbed 12s before, dozens of them, and in every case, within a generation, the species in question had stopped remembering what it felt like to live outside the network. They always adapted. They always came to understand, eventually, that the hegemony had not taken anything from them. It had given them the only thing that mattered. He tapped his fan digits against the arm of the chair and moved to the next item in his summary. The next item was a request from Earth's Coordinating Council for a formal channel to negotiate the terms of the research post status. Valerius marked it filed, no response required, and closed the summary. At the Himalayan facility, Director Vance was on her fourth cup of tea. This one she actually drank while it was still warm, and she was reading a report that had no header, no classification stamp, and no author listed. It was 6 pages long. It was a status update from a network that officially did not exist. 14 years ago, when the first Chiron survey probe had been detected passing through the outer system, not by any official monitoring body, but by a radio astronomer in Chile who happened to be pointing her array in the wrong direction at the right time, Vance had been a mid-level analyst at a department that had no public name. She had read the probe's signal signature. She had run 3 separate analyses on it, each reaching the same conclusion. Then she had walked into her director's office and placed the report on his desk and said, "We have about a decade, maybe less. I need a team, a budget, and permission to do something that is going to look insane." She had gotten all 3. The program was called Glass Ledger. The idea was straightforward in concept and almost impossible in execution, that the Chiron hegemony's greatest strength, its total integration network, the vast hyperconnected logistics web that ran everything from fleet positioning to supply chains to command authentication, was also its greatest vulnerability. Every node in that network ran on a common protocol layer. Every update pushed to that layer was pulled automatically by every connected system. The network was, in Chiron doctrine, perfectly closed and perfectly safe, because only Chiron systems could generate valid update packages. The question Vance had asked 14 years ago was, what if they're wrong about that? She had not known at the time whether the answer was yes or no. She knew now. The 6-page report in her hands was a confirmation from the last of 17 relay points, a physical server, hardwired and air-gapped, running in a facility 3 kilometers underground in the Ural Mountains, that the final bridge key had been accepted. 14 years of work, 2 entire sleeper agent networks burned, 11 people who would never come home from the places they had gone to plant the pieces of what Vance had built. The ledger was inside. All of it. Every update the hegemony had pushed to its logistics network in the last 6 years had carried a dormant passenger, a code layer so thin and so patient it had never once triggered an anomaly flag. It did nothing, it sat, it waited. It learned the shape of the network from the inside, the way water learns the shape of a vessel, and it had been doing this long enough now that it knew every corridor, every junction, every failsafe and override and authentication bypass in the entire Chiron logistics web. Vance set the report face down on the table. She picked up her tea, she drank it. "How long until full synchronization?" she asked. Faris checked the secondary console. 72 hours, give or take 4. Vance nodded. She did not say anything else. There was nothing else to say that wasn't already said in 14 years of patient silence by a code layer that the Chiron hegemony had been distributing to its own fleet without knowing what it was carrying. Outside, 12,000 ships held their positions above a planet they had already written off as a 12. They were still waiting for the humans to say something. 72 hours passed the way long waits always pass, slowly and then all at once. Vance spent most of them in the lower level of the facility, in a room that had no official designation on any floor plan. The room held 12 workstations, a physical server stack that hummed at a frequency you felt more than heard, and a wall covered in what looked, to anyone who had never worked in this program, like an architectural diagram of a very large building. It was not an architectural diagram. It was a map of the Chiron logistics network, not the version the hegemony published in its diplomatic data packets, which was itself already staggeringly complex, but the version Glass Ledger had been drawing from the inside for 6 years. Every node, every handshake protocol, every authentication bridge, rendered in lines so fine they had to be read with a magnifying lens. The map had been started by a woman named Daria Osai. Daria was one of the 11 who had not come home. She had been the program's first network architect, and she had spent 3 years developing the theory that the Chiron update protocol had a specific structural property, a recursive validation loop in the handshake sequence, that could, under exactly the right conditions, be used to inject a foreign code layer without triggering the anomaly detection. She had called it the gap in the grammar. She had written 400 pages proving it could theoretically work, and then she had gone to the place where it needed to be proven in practice, and she had proven it, and she had not come back. Vance looked at the map and thought about Daria's handwriting, which had been very small and very precise. Then she stopped thinking about it because there was work to do. The synchronization had completed at hour 68, 4 hours ahead of schedule. This was not a cause for celebration. Vance did not run a program where people celebrated ahead of schedule delivery, because ahead of schedule in an operation of this sensitivity meant something had either gone very right or very wrong, and you did not know which until you checked everything twice. They checked everything twice. Everything had gone very right. The ledger was not just inside the network. It had propagated fully. Every update cycle the hegemony had run in the last 6 years had carried the passenger, and the passenger had spread with the updates, the way a word spreads through a language, gradually, then completely. The 12,000 ships of the blockade fleet had pulled 3 major update packages in the last 4 months alone, each one standard Chiron logistics architecture, each one carrying the Glass Ledger's deepest layer without knowing it. The fleet's engines ran on authenticated command packages, so did their weapons systems, so did their navigation, so did the kinetic dampeners that kept ordnance from detonating inside the ship's own hull. All of it authenticated through the same protocol layer. All of it now reachable. Faris had put this finding in a written summary and handed it to Vance on paper, also at her instruction from the beginning, and when she read the line, "All primary fire control systems authenticate through ledger-reachable channels," she had set the page face down, taken a breath, and said, "Good, close it out and burn the page." Faris had burned the page. He had not asked why they burned pages instead of shredding them. What the Chiron hegemony did not know about Glass Ledger, what they could not have known, because the blind spot was structural, was that the recursive validation loop Daria had identified was not a design flaw. It was a feature. The Chiron engineers who built the protocol had included it deliberately, because in a network of sufficient complexity, you needed a way for subsystems to confirm that updates were internally consistent without requiring a central authority to approve each one. It made the network faster, it made it more resilient, it made it almost perfectly self-healing. It also meant that a sufficiently patient foreign code, if it could establish itself inside the validation layer, would be treated by the network as part of the network, not tolerated, not sandboxed, part of it. The ledger did not sit beside the Chiron systems, it had become, functionally, one of them. The hegemony's greatest engineers had designed a network so good at trusting itself that it had learned to trust something that wasn't itself. They had taught it, over 18,000 years, that the network was always right. They had never considered the possibility that someone else might teach it something different. Meanwhile, on the Ascendant Creed, High Provost Valerius was having a productive week. The civilization audit was 91% complete. Earth's integration tier had been formally set. The intake protocols for the Epsilon 9 researchers were running on schedule. He had filed 3 administrative commendations for junior officers who had managed the process with particular efficiency, and he had approved a preliminary timeline for the first wave of network infrastructure installation, the physical receiver arrays that would begin Earth's connection to the hegemony grid. He had also, at the quiet recommendation of his logistics officer, sent a second message to Earth's Coordinating Council. Not a response to their negotiation request. He had no interest in negotiating, but a procedural notice outlining the timeline for integration. It was the standard document. He had sent it 412 times before. He was waiting for the standard response, a period of public grief, some symbolic resistance, a formal request for a slower timeline, and then acceptance. They always accepted. The network was too useful, too vast, too present to refuse indefinitely. Every species reached the same conclusion, eventually. He was tapping his fan digits against the arm of the chair when his logistics officer entered the command room with the day's summary. "Any anomalies?" Valerius asked without looking up. "Minor instability in the secondary receiver test array," the logistics officer said. "Self-resolved, no further flag." Valerius nodded. "The humans," he said, "have they responded to the procedural notice?" "No, High Provost." "They will," Valerius said, and returned to his summary. In the Himalayan facility, Vance was reading a different kind of summary. It was a list of names. Not the 11. She knew those by memory, had known them for years in some cases, had shaken their hands and told them what the work was and what it might cost, and had watched them decide anyway, one by one, in separate rooms, on separate days, with the same expression on their faces, the expression of someone who has done the math and found the math acceptable. This list was longer. It was the roster of every human agent who had, at some point in the last 14 years, contributed to the construction and delivery of Glass Ledger, not the 11 who had died, but all of them. The analysts who had mapped the protocol, the engineers who had written the code, the couriers who had carried physical media through Chiron-held transit corridors, hidden in the frames of luggage and the linings of clothing, and one memorable case in a prosthetic knee that had been installed specifically for the purpose. The signals technicians who had spent years monitoring the hegemony's update cadence so the ledger's dormant packets could be timed to ride updates without being flagged as anomalies. Hundreds of people, most of them had never met each other. Most of them had never known the full shape of what they were building. They had each held one piece, and the piece had looked, from where they stood, like a very small and not very important thing. That was by design. Vance closed the list. "Varus," she said. "Yes, Director." "Pull up the blockade formation map, the current one with positions updated." Varus pulled it up. 12,000 contacts, color-coded by ship class, holding a rough sphere around Earth's orbital plane. The sphere had not changed in 3 weeks. It was, Vance thought, a very confident formation, the kind of arrangement you used when you were not expecting any trouble from the planet you were blockading, only paperwork. She looked at the map for a long time. Then she said, "What's the reaction time on full fleet reorientation if they decided to begin orbital bombardment?" Varus ran the number. "At current spacing and drive response, about 4 minutes from order to first kinetic release." "And the ledger's authentication window?" Varus checked the secondary console. He was quiet for a moment. 11 seconds, he said. Vance nodded. She looked back at the map. "Then we have time to do this the right way," she said. The dramatic irony had been building for 3 weeks, but it crystallized on day 22, when the Chiron logistics officer submitted a routine network diagnostic to the fleet's maintenance registry. The kind of check that happened automatically, that nobody read, that existed only to confirm the systems were nominal, and the diagnostic came back clean. Every system nominal, every authentication pathway clear, every drive system, weapons array, and command interface responding correctly. The ledger had been asked, in effect, to confirm its own invisibility, and it had confirmed it because it was now the part of the network that answered those questions. Valerius never saw the diagnostic. It went to the maintenance registry, was logged, and was automatically archived. But if he had seen it, if he had looked at the clean green readout and understood what it meant, the thing he would have realized is that the humans had not hacked his network. They had become part of it. And you cannot audit something that is performing the audit. On the 24th day, a message arrived at the Himalayan facility from a contact who identified themselves only by a code phrase Vance had not heard spoken aloud in 9 years. The message was 4 words long. "The door is open." It was from the last surviving member of the second sleeper network, the one that had been burned, all but one. Vance had not known, until this moment, that there was a survivor. She sat with that knowledge for a moment, let it exist in the room, and then set it aside. There would be time for that later. She looked at Faris. "How long until the High Provost's fleet begins the infrastructure installation?" she asked. Faris checked the Chiron procedural timeline, which they had been monitoring through a passive intercept. 78 hours, he said. First receiver arrays touched the upper atmosphere at hour 78. Vance calculated. "Then we move in 48, she said. The room went very quiet, the way rooms go quiet when a number is named that everyone has been counting toward for a long time without saying it out loud. 48 hours. Faris nodded. He turned back to his console. His hands were steady. Vance stood and walked to the wall map, the physical one, the paper one, printed at her order and pinned with actual pins, and she looked at the formation of 12,000 ships above a planet that had scored a 12 on the hegemony's connectivity scale, and she thought, they measured what they could see. She turned off the light above the map. The 48 hours ended on a Tuesday. Vance had not slept. She had tried once for about 90 minutes in the early hours of the second day, lying on a cot in the corner of the operations room with her boots still on, and she had woken from something that wasn't quite sleep with the absolute certainty that she had forgotten something critical. She had not forgotten anything. She had checked, but she stayed awake after that because the certainty didn't go away just because it was wrong. At hour 46, she asked Faris to pull the Chiron fleet's current command status. Faris pulled it. He read the passive intercept for a long moment. High Provost Valerius filed a commendation report at 300 local fleet time, he said, and a request for an updated integration timeline. He's moved the receiver array deployment forward by 6 hours. Vance looked at him. He's impatient, she said. Yes. Good, she picked up her tea. Impatient commanders cut corners. Impatient commanders don't double-check their diagnostic returns. She drank the tea. It was, for once, still warm. Across the fleet, the morning shift changeover happened the same way it always happened. The outgoing crew filed their handoff reports, the incoming crew reviewed them, and the vast machinery of 12,000 ships continued doing what it had been doing for 3 weeks without interruption. Systems nominal, authentication pathways clear, command interfaces responding correctly. Valerius arrived on the command deck of the Ascendant Creed at what his staff had come to recognize as his standard time, early enough to read the overnight summary before the shift was fully staffed, late enough to avoid appearing anxious. He settled into his command chair, pulled up the morning display, and began to read. The audit was complete. Earth had been formally logged in the Hegemony's intake registry as Species 413, Category 12, Integration Tier, pending infrastructure deployment. The paperwork was filed. The notification had been sent to the Integration Ministry. Everything was in order. He tapped his fan digits against the arm of the chair. Everything was, as it had been for 3 weeks, in order. He poured himself a measure of the dark mineral water his staff kept chilled for him and set it on the console edge without drinking it. At the Himalayan facility, Vance stood in front of the wall map and looked at it for the last time. The paper, the pins, Daria's handwriting in the margins, very small, very precise, labeling the nodes of the Chiron network in the months before the program had a proper mapping system, when Daria had done the first drafts by hand because she had not yet trusted any digital rendering to be accurate enough. The labels were still there, small, dense clusters of notation that a stranger would have read as technical shorthand and that Vance had long since memorized as a kind of portrait. She reached out and touched the edge of the map. Then she turned to Faris. "Activate the ledger," she said. Faris typed 4 keystrokes on the hardwired console. The secondary display changed from a standby indicator to a single line. Glass ledger, command authority, transferred. Nothing else happened. No alarm, no vibration, no light show. Somewhere above them, in the orbital formation of 12,000 ships, a protocol layer that had spent 6 years learning the shape of the hegemony's network from the inside reached out to every system it had been taught to trust, and it did what networks do when they receive a valid, authenticated command from a recognized source. It obeyed. Valerius was reading the integration timeline when his command display went dark. Not dimmed, not flickered, dark. He looked at it the way experienced commanders look at unexpected things, steadily, without expression, while the part of his mind that managed threat assessment began running through possibilities. Power fluctuation, display fault, software reset. He had seen all of these before. He had never seen a display go fully dark without a warning or a diagnostic flag. He waited 2 seconds for the automatic restore. It did not restore. He looked at his logistics officer. Display fault on the primary command console. His logistics officer checked his own station. The color left his face, or rather, the blue-gray undertone that indicated calm in Chiron physiology drained out of it, replaced by the flat pale that Vance, had she been present to see it, would have recognized as the color of someone whose math has suddenly stopped working. "High Provost," the logistics officer said, "I'm showing the same on secondary." Valerius turned to the tactical station. The officer there had both hands on his console and was making the rapid, precise movements of someone running a manual override. He stopped making them. He looked at Valerius. "Tertiary as well," he said. The word that came into Valerius's mind was not a Chiron word. It was a concept the hegemony's classification system did not have a category for, because in 18,000 years of total integration, the Chiron had never needed a word for this. The closest translation was something like the moment when a system you trust tells you something impossible. Before he could speak, the displays came back. All of them simultaneously. But the tactical map was gone. The integration timeline was gone. The commendation report and the intake registry and the mineral water order and the 600 other administrative items that had been running on his command deck were gone. In their place, a balanced scale. Rendered in clean white lines on a dark background. 2 pans, one empty, one holding a single small symbol Valerius recognized, after a moment, as a human ideograph, one of the writing systems from the planet below, rendered precisely as if by someone who had spent a great deal of time learning to draw it correctly. He stared at it. The fan digits of his right hand pressed flat against the arm of the chair and stopped tapping. 3 things happened in the next 40 seconds that Valerius would spend the rest of his life trying to accurately describe. The first, he reached for the command override on the arm of his chair, the physical hardware interrupt that bypassed all software and reset the command deck to factory defaults, and pressed it. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. He held it for 5 full seconds, which was 3 seconds longer than the manual specified. The display did not change. The second, his weapons officer reported, in a voice that was very controlled, that fire control authentication was returning an error code that did not exist in the hegemony's error index. The officer read the code aloud. Valerius did not recognize it either. It was not Chiron's syntax. The third, the kinetic dampeners across the fleet, the failsafe systems that prevented ordnance from detonating inside a ship's own hull, registered a status change. They had not been triggered. They had been set remotely to a locked state. They could not be released without an authentication key that nobody on the Ascendant Creed held. The weapons officer looked at Valerius. "High Provost," he said, and stopped, because there was nothing to follow it with. Valerius looked at the balance scale on his display. He looked at it for a long time, doing the arithmetic that a commander does when his certainty starts to fail, working backward through the chain of events, looking for the point of entry, looking for the moment he could have caught it. The civilian transit corridors they had not fully audited. The update package anomaly flagged and dismissed. The non-standard packet transfer protocol that his logistics officer had noted and he had not followed up on. He was still doing the arithmetic when the balance scale vanished. And Director Elena Vance appeared on his screen. She was sitting at a table. Behind her was a wall with a physical map pinned to it. Her hands were folded on the table. She was not in a uniform. She was not in front of any visible military hardware. She looked, Valerius thought, like a person who had called to discuss a scheduling problem. "High Provost Valerius," she said. Her voice was level. "My name is Director Elena Vance. I represent the people of Earth. I want to tell you what has happened to your fleet because I think you deserve to understand it." Valerius said nothing. 14 years ago, Vance said, "we detected your survey probe in our outer system. You didn't know that. We didn't announce it. We spent those 14 years doing one thing, learning the grammar of your network. The update architecture you've been pushing to your fleet for the last 6 years has been carrying a passenger. We call it Glass Ledger. By now you've seen what it can do, or rather, what your systems can no longer do." She paused. "Your engines are responding to our authentication. Your weapons systems are locked. Your kinetic dampeners are in a permanent failsafe state. Your command interfaces are displaying what we choose to display." She did not raise her voice. She did not lean forward. "High Provost, your fleet is no longer yours. We have reconciled the ledger." Valerius found his voice. "This is not possible," he said. "The network is closed. Only Chiron-generated packages can." "Your network is closed," Vance said. "We became part of it." The silence that followed was the particular kind of silence that happens when a man's foundational belief encounters a fact that does not fit inside it, and there is no way to make the fact smaller. Valerius looked at the error code his weapons officer had read aloud, not Chiron's syntax. He had thought, for one moment, that it was a corruption artifact. He understood now that it was not a corruption artifact. It was a signature. It was theirs. "You scored us a 12, Vance said. Her voice had not changed register at all. "Out of 300, your audit team was very thorough. They catalogued everything they could see." She let that land. "The things they couldn't see are why we're having this conversation." On the Ascendant Creed, no one spoke. The command deck had the particular stillness of a room full of trained professionals who have all reached the same conclusion at approximately the same moment and are each waiting for someone else to say it first. Valerius's logistics officer said, very quietly, "The diagnostic, the clean diagnostic." "Yes," Valerius said. "It answered itself." "Yes." Across the fleet, all 12,000 ships, spread in their confident sphere above a planet that had not fired a single weapon, had not launched a single vessel, had not broadcast a single military signal in 3 weeks of blockade, the engine drive signatures went flat. Not off, not damaged. Flat, the way a system goes flat when it is receiving a hold command from an authenticated source it trusts completely. The fleet was not destroyed. It was simply parked. Valerius said nothing for a long time. His logistics officer had stopped looking at his console. The tactical officer had his hands flat on the desk in front of him, very still, the way hands go still when there is nothing useful for them to do. The command deck of the Ascendant Creed, a vessel so large its shadow fell across two weather satellites simultaneously, was quiet in the way that large rooms go quiet when the people inside them have all understood the same thing and none of them wants to be the first to say it. Vance waited. She was good at waiting. She had, by her own rough count, spent 14 years doing almost nothing else. "What do you want?" Valeria said finally. Vance unfolded her hands. She reached to the side of the table, a small, unhurried movement, and picked up her cup of tea. She drank from it. She set it down. "3 things," she said. "First, the 41 researchers taken from Epsilon 9 are returned, all of them, unaltered, in good health, on a shuttle of their own, within 72 hours. Valerius said nothing. "Second, your fleet leaves our system, all of it, within 5 days. You do not file a return approach. You do not send another survey probe. You do not add us to any intake registry or integration timeline." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was exactly the same, no harder, no louder, no warmer. "Third, when you return to your hegemony, you will submit a formal report to the Integration Ministry recommending that Earth be removed from all consideration for integration proceedings. Permanently, you will cite," she said, "technical incompatibility." Valerius's logistics officer made a small sound that was not a word. "Technical incompatibility," Valerius repeated. "Yes." He looked at her on the screen. She looked back at him. Behind her, the paper map on the wall was just visible at the edge of the frame. "And if I refuse?" Valerius said. Vance tilted her head very slightly. "High Provost, you have 12,000 ships in our orbital space. They have been parked, intact, by a system that spent 6 years learning exactly what they are and how they work. I have not harmed them. I have not harmed your crew." She picked up her tea again, held it, did not drink. "I think you understand what I am telling you, without me needing to tell you what happens if you say no." He understood. He had been doing the arithmetic since his display went dark, and he had arrived, by now, at a number he did not want to say aloud. If the ledger could park 12,000 ships, it could do other things to 12,000 ships. Things that would not leave much to retrieve. The restraint was the threat. That was what she was showing him, not what they had done, what they had chosen not to do. "You had access to our fire control systems," Valerius said. It was not quite a question. "Yes." "For how long?" Vance set the tea down, long enough that the question doesn't change anything. The negotiations, if they could be called that, which Valerius privately felt they could not, since a negotiation implies 2 parties with something to exchange, and he had nothing left to exchange, took 4 hours, not because the terms were complicated. They were not complicated. They were 3 sentences. The 4 hours were the time it took for Valerius to work through the stages of a man who has spent his adult life believing something fundamental about how the universe is ordered, and has then been shown, without theater or cruelty, that he was wrong. At hour 2, he asked to speak with his senior staff privately. Vance agreed, closed the channel, and waited in the operations room while Faris made more tea and did not say anything unnecessary. At hour 3, Valerius reopened the channel. "There is a condition," he said. "There are no conditions," Vance said. He looked at her for a moment, then he nodded once and looked away. At hour 4, his logistics officer transmitted the formal acceptance to the Himalayan facility. Vance read it. She checked all 3 terms against the text. They were there, exact, in the same order she had stated them. She signed it with a stylus on a physical form, paper again, and handed it to Faris, who scanned it and transmitted the reply. "Glass ledger," Vance said. "Suspend active command. Return authentication to Chiron authority. Do not release the kinetic dampeners until all researchers are confirmed aboard a shuttle and clear of Chiron custody." Faris typed the instruction. Above them, 12,000 ships woke up, their engines live again, their displays returning to their own tactical maps, their command interfaces responsive to their own crews. All of it exactly as it had been before. No damage, no data lost, no personnel harmed. 12,000 ships, not a single shot fired. The shuttle carrying the 41 researchers from Epsilon 9 entered Earth's upper atmosphere at hour 68, 4 hours inside the deadline. Vance was not watching the descent feed when it happened. She was at the wall map, removing the pins, one by one, and rolling the paper carefully, the way you handle something you intend to keep. The map was not a relic, it was a record. The Epsilon 9 station was marked on it in Daria's handwriting, not a symbol, an actual label, small and precise, in the margin of the relevant sector. She did not unroll the map to look at it. She placed it in a cardboard tube and sealed the end. Faris's console chimed. All 41 confirmed aboard, he said. Descent nominal, landing in about 90 minutes. Vance nodded. She held the cardboard tube for a moment, then set it against the wall where the map had been pinned. The Chiron fleet began its withdrawal at hour 93, 3 hours inside the 5-day window. Valerius did not watch Earth as they left. He sat in his command chair with his hands in his lap and looked at the forward display, which showed the fleet's departure formation, and he was very still. The fan digits of his right hand pressed flat against his thigh and did not move. His logistics officer stood nearby, because someone had to stand nearby, and did not speak. After a long time, Valerius said, "File a course correction for the transit point." "Yes, High Provost." "And pull the audit report, the full one." The logistics officer pulled it. He set it on the console beside Valerius's hand. The report was comprehensive, 91% complete when the systems had gone dark, filled in afterward from recovered records. Earth, species 413, connectivity score 12, integration tier pending. Valerius looked at the score for a while. Then he opened the report to the technical appendix, the section his logistics officer had flagged weeks ago about the non-standard packet transfer protocols. The flag he had not followed up on. He read the flagged paragraph 3 times. He closed the report. He did not add a note to it. He did not reclassify it. He set it on the console, face down, and did not pick it up again. 6 months later, a current Integration Ministry official named Sura Vel was reviewing the annual intake registry when she found a discrepancy. Species 413, Homo sapiens, Earth, had been entered in the registry at integration tier pending, but the corresponding integration file had been formally closed by High Provost Valerius with a single-line notation, technical incompatibility, removed from all proceedings. Sura Vel had processed integration files for a long time. She had never seen that notation. She pulled the full report. She read the technical appendix. She read the flagged paragraph about the non-standard protocols. She noted the absence of any follow-up analysis, and the absence of any damage report, and the absence of any military engagement record. The record showed only that a fleet had been dispatched, had maintained a blockade for 26 days, and had returned home on its own power with all ships and crew intact. She flagged the file for review. She titled the flag, "Assessment Discrepancy, Species Capability May Require Reclassification." 3 days later, a review board of the Integration Ministry's senior analysts had read the full report and reached a consensus. They updated Earth's entry in the registry. Connectivity score 12 as measured. Classification silent architects. Status category unresolved, do not approach. Months after that, the exact number was not recorded because the person writing the account was not certain of the date. A journalist on a small orbital station near the hegemony's outer edge published a piece that spread through the information networks faster than anything she had written before. It was not about Earth, not directly. It was about a pattern she had noticed in the Integration Ministry's records, a cluster of files spanning the last year that all carried some version of the same notation, species or system flagged for technical anomaly, removed from proceedings, classification updated. The pattern, she wrote, pointed to a question nobody in the hegemony seemed willing to ask directly. What kind of species receives a connectivity score of 12 and then quietly becomes part of your network without you noticing? The article did not answer the question. It did not need to. In the Himalayan facility, now decommissioned, the operations room was empty. The server stack had been removed. The wall where the map had been pinned showed 12 small holes where the pins had been, and a rectangle of slightly lighter paint where the paper had protected the wall from the light. The cardboard tube was in a different room, on a shelf, between two unremarkable boxes. On the shelf below it, a physical copy of the Integration Ministry's updated registry, printed on paper at someone's instruction, because some things need to exist in forms that certain systems cannot reach. The entry for Earth had been circled in pen. 2 words, silent architects. No annotation, no celebration, no stated moral. The circle was enough. Humanity does not fight for space. They fight for the right to define the terms of the silence.